Economic Transformation, The Balance of the Forces, hosted by the Department of Politics and International Relations, Sociology and Anthropology, and Development Studies. I extend a particular warm welcome to our honored guests, Pravin, Gordhan, Mcebisi, Jonas, the former Minister and Deputy Minister of Finance, and to Lumkile Mundi of Wits University, who will be the discussant today. I am Cheryl Hendricks. I head the Department of Politics and International Relations. Our Vice Chancellor, Professor Aaron Rensburg, is going to do the welcome. Unfortunately, he cannot be here with us today, but he certainly extends his welcome. The seminar, please settle down. The seminar has been long in the making. We were discussing it from the end of March. Early April, we wanted to have this. Unfortunately, we could not have it then. It has attracted, as we can see, way more interest than we expected. It was going to be a normal seminar series that we always have. So let me welcome all of those who are coming from the outside, not at UJ, as well as our UJ participants here today. Let me also say apologies for the confusion around the venue. We had to shift it from the library to this particular venue when we saw the number of RSVPs, which also then indicates the level of interest in this subject matter. We are here in the Sanlam Auditorium. As you have noticed, it is still under construction. It was burnt during the student protests, and I want to actually begin by thanking the AVU people, the auxiliary and security, for making this possible, because we had to shift at very short notice, and so they had to make it presentable so that we can be here today. And I want to start by thanking them for this. The student protest, Save South Africa campaign, and the debates around state capture, white monopoly capital, and radical economic transformation have reignited political activism in South Africa. State capture, white monopoly capital, and radical economic transformation are all contested concepts, as we are well aware. The university should be a space in which we can safely reflect on why we find ourselves in the current conjuncture, what we mean by these concepts, and what is to be done. This kind of robust debate we are hoping to have here today, and in so doing, reposition our universities as key spaces for intellectual debate in the country. The exposure by Mcebisi, Jonas, and Feki Mentor of the Guptas offering them cabinet positions unleashed a public outcry of the level of corruption in South Africa. The then public protector Thuli Madonsela, who had already become a household name because of her investigations into Nkandla, was tasked to investigate the alleged, and I quote, improper and unethical conduct by the president and state functionaries in their involvement with the Guptas. In 2016, she released a report titled State Capture, in which some of these corrupt dealings were documented. State capture, it is argued, is not ordinary individualized corruption. It is systemic corruption, where private interests influence state decision-making to their own economic advantage. It is a political project of repurposing state institutions for unproductive rent-seeking purposes, so we are informed. The report by academics titled Betrayal of the Promise, How South Africa is Being Stolen, that was released in May 2017, so very recently, and who uses this repurposing state institutions, describes the formation of a shadow state and kitchen cabinets, and contends that with state capture, there's a symbiotic relationship between the constitutional state and the shadow state, and that real power increasingly begins to reside in the shadow state. The allegations that the Guptas were in effect at the core of this shadow state, and that there is a political elite intent on centralizing tendering in order to control the rent-seeking to their own advantage, has constituted the mainstay of these debates. The academic report specifically states that we have experienced a silent coup with 4 defining moments. And it highlights the Marikana massacre, the landing of the Gupta plane at the Waterkloof Air Force Base, the attempt to bribe Mcebisi Jonas to sell National Treasury, and the cabinet reshuffle in March. In what one can call the night of the long knives, where we saw 5 ministers and 3 deputy ministers being axed, including the Honorable Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas. This was an attempt, it has been argued, to gain control over key institution needed for the mission of state capture, National Treasury. The removal was supposedly based on a fake intelligence report of their intentions to undermine the president with international bankers. The political maneuverings and machinations were clearly at play, for as Pravin kept saying, connect the dots, connect the dots. Well, we hope that this afternoon we will get a clearer picture of how these dots are connected. Since March, much has come to light through the Gupta-leaked emails and a long litany of alleged corrupt practices in the appointment and awarding of tenders at the state-owned enterprises. It appears that we are in trouble. The positive spin-off is that we are again discussing our future economic and political paths for this country, and that we have seen a strong resistance to the attempts to undermine our democracy. Debate means that there are multiple ways to view a particular situation, and indeed, this is what we see happening in South Africa. There's a defense, there's a denial, there are alternative views that come to the fore. So we're told about fake news, we are also told about the need to break the hold of monopoly capital, we are told about the need for decolonization and radical economic transformation, and certainly we as a country, we need to be reviewing these issues. We need to review why we have such little progress in dealing with poverty and inequality in our country. We need to be reviewing why we haven't been able to change the face of the commanding heights of the economy. And many in our country have spoken on this need to fight both monopoly capital and tender-based capitalists, irrespective of the color. And I want to quote Cronin here, where he states, radical economic transformation is simply impossible with a corporately captured state and an ANC-led movement factionalized by money and patronage networks. Today, we are fortunate to have 2 victims, but also 2 central figures in the fight of the state capture. We are all keen, I'm sure, to hear their views and engage with them on this topic, but also, order please, order, we are keen to hear their views on this topic, but also more on perhaps the divisions that this has caused within the ranks of the ANC. Just to introduce our speakers very quickly, Pravin Gordhan, please, we're going to ask you to please respect the House and to be quiet when people are speaking. You will have your turn for questions. Today, Pravin Gordhan held the position of Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2014, and again from 2015 to 2017. He also served as the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs from 2014 to 2015, and as the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service from 1999 to 2009. As a Member of Parliament from 1994 to 1998, he chaired the parliamentary committee that focused on the implementation of the new constitution and the transformation of local government. Gordhan's political trajectory can be tracked to the 1970s and 80s, where he was an active student leader, first as a member of the National Indian Congress, which was also affiliated organization of the UDF, and then as part of the South African Communist Party and the ANC. He holds an honorary doctorate of commerce from the University of South Africa, an honorary doctorate of law from the University of Cape Town, a D.Tech in business administration from the Free State Central University of Technology, and a Bachelor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Durban-Westville, which is now the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Mcebisi Jonas is the former Deputy Minister of Finance, a position he held from 2014 up until the reshuffle in 2017. His political career dates to his youth, where he was inspired by the politics of black consciousness in the early 80s and was an organizer of Azaso. Jonas also played a key role in the establishment of the UDF. Upon his return from exile, he was deployed by the ANC to establish a new provincial administration in the Eastern Cape in 1994. He has also been the Chief Executive Officer for the Centre for Investment Marketing of the Eastern Cape and for the Eastern Cape Development Corporation. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Sociology from Vista University and a Diploma in Education from Rhodes University. Lumkile Mondi is a senior lecturer in the School of Economics and Business Sciences at Wits University and holds an MA in Economics from the Eastern Illinois University and a BCom from the University of the Witwatersrand. He's one of the authors of The Betrayal of the Promise, How South Africa Has Been Stolen, so we'll hear his views on that. Lumkile Mondi was employed by the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa as the chief economist for 10 years. He has served in President Zuma's state-owned enterprises, presidential review, also as a member of the President Mbeki's Economic Advisory Panel. He worked for Transnet as the Deputy Treasurer for 5 years, and prior to that at Deloitte & Touche Consulting Group. He has also served on various boards and is involved in the BRICS think tank in institutional strengthening and coordination. Our own Professor Ashwin Desai will do the voting, the vote of thanks and the summary of our discussions here today. Each speaker will have 20 minutes, the discussant will have 15 minutes, and then we will open the floor. You see 2 mics there. We will ask people who want to ask questions to please come to the mic. There will be post-interviews for the media after everything. I'm going to ask that those who want to tweet, the hashtag is #UJLecture, I'm told. I trust, as I hand over, I trust that we are going to have a healthy exchange, a fruitful exchange, and that we are going to be respectful of different opinions here today. Pravin, Gordhan, the floor is yours.
Amandla, all power. Now we must ask the question, as I say, thank you for inviting us here today and recognizing my 2 colleagues on the panel, Mcebisi Jonas, with whom I've worked very closely for many years, and Lumkile Mondi, who I'm sure we're going to work together many more years into the future, all professors, doctors, students, and members of the public that are here. I start with the slogan, Amandla Wetu, because today, certainly Mcebisi and myself don't stand here as victims. We stand here as proud cadres of the African National Congress. We stand here as proud freedom fighters who, over many years, together with thousands of other activists, have been intent upon creating a South Africa where all 55 million people in South Africa certainly don't live the kind of life that they live today. They live a life which is in accordance with the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. They live a life where we can proudly say that we've transformed South Africa into a country where human dignity is enjoyed by every single citizen in every respect of human dignity. And this quotation from Tata Madiba, in a sense, captures the mission that the African National Congress and others who have contributed to our liberation have striven for over the years. And the quotation is one which says, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead." So the question today is, what difference are we making to the lives of others? Whether state capture is a contribution to improving the lives of others, whether monopoly capital, black or white, radical economic transformation, in whatever form we describe it, and I'll get back to that, is a contribution to improving the lives of all South Africans. I also want to reiterate that it's important that we have open and frequent exchanges and debates around the kind of issues that you've put on the table today. And perhaps one of the questions that arises very sharply from what we've recently learned from Gupta leaks and whatever leaks we want to talk about is a proposition that I want to put to all of you. How many of you would accept 600 million rands in a bribe from the Guptas? 1, 2. You see, that's the critical question in South Africa today. Here we have a person right in front of you who was offered a 600 million rand bribe and said, "Keep it." And he said, keep it because he was not prepared to sell out the sovereignty of our country, after so many have fought for it. He said, keep it because he was not prepared to sell our sovereignty to anybody as well. And that's the critical moral, ethical, and principal question that all of us are faced with, whether we are academics, whether we're in political office today or not in political office, doesn't really matter, or whether we're members of the public or activists in one or other formation. Each one of us today, given the nature of the crisis that we face in this country, some of which I will describe to you, have to confront that question. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the people? And are you on the side of creating an honest South Africa where we are not described as a nation of corrupt people, but a nation that is proudly standing by the kind of principles and values that the Mandelas, Sisulus, Tambos, and others have stood by? That's the choice that we have today. So, why is state capture so important to resist? And it answers one of the questions that was put to us: what are the consequences of state capture? My two colleagues, I'm sure, will give you the details about how state capture has occurred, as the researchers have recently reported in their document. But state capture, put simply, is the stealing of certain institutions in the state by a small group of people whose only intention is to put money either into their pockets in South Africa or in bank accounts in Dubai or anywhere else. It's a simple proposition. So state capture, so those of you that are booing me, means you approve of state capture, but we'll come back to that. You see, otherwise you would all agree with me as good, principled South Africans that state capture is a no-go area for us? That's the question. Now, when you start stealing institutions, that begins to lead to stealing money. Put it in frank terms. The academics will describe it in more elegant terms for you. But it is about stealing at the end of the day. Because we are taking resources, including, for example, where you buy locomotives for 50 billion rands and give a commission of 20% on it. Some say 5 billion, some say 10 billion. Now, how nice it would be for all of you individually to just say, I introduce you to person X. When you make the 50 billion rand deal, give me 5 billion or 10 billion and I stash it somewhere. That's what stealing is about at the end of the day. If anybody has evidence to the contrary, bring it. And let's then talk about it as well. So 5 billion rand or 10 billion rands stolen from the public purse can make a huge difference to housing or education or fees or health and welfare services in our country. But you can multiply that 5 or 10 billion rands many times over. Some say it's 40 billion a year, others say it's 80 billion a year. Perhaps my two colleagues have a number. But the fact of the matter is, this kind of stealing from the public purse and stealing of funds as a result of state capture impacts on every single citizen. And you know what is remarkable since the time we've got dismissed, but not even before that as well, when you meet South Africans in all walks of life, in all the different occupations that you can imagine, the humblest to the most sophisticated, they know who is stealing, they know who is responsible for what is going on in this country, and they know what needs to be done in order to stop this problem. But the second and important implication of state capture is that we are depriving young people in our country of jobs through growing our economy. And at the same time, we are saying that we're not creating jobs in our environment. The third factor is that we have a serious decline in our political morality. The quality of politics, the quality of our narrative, the quality of the way in which we engage politically as well, and the morality that underpins it is being eroded every single day. So anything goes today in order to get the kind of political support, even lies, in order to make sure that one actually benefits from state capture. The fourth and important element is that we are destroying, as the South African Council of Churches said to the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises yesterday, through its Secretary General, Bishop Mpulwana, that we are destroying or undermining the ethical foundations of our society. So we are beginning to have a blurring of what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. What is the economic impact? And I'll come back to this question, but in general terms, you can see that we are today in negative growth. Hopefully we come just above zero in the next quarter that is going to be reported shortly. But as a result of lower growth, we have lower revenue. As a result of lower revenue, we have less money in the fiscus to spend, more money to borrow when we don't have space to actually borrow. But as a result of both the growth factor and the state capture factor and the unhappiness that South Africans have about it, we also have a freezing on the investment side. And no economy can grow. No jobs will be created. No money for fees for hospitals or for any other form of education or public service is going to be found if we continue to have a declining economy and declining fiscal revenue. And as a result of lower investment, there's an interplay between that and lower confidence in our country. And as a result of both of those factors, as you can see, the kind of partnerships that we are absolutely crucial in order to reach 35% of investment in our country, both as the private sector and as the public sector, is a target that we're not going to reach. We are sitting somewhere around 18, 19% at the moment. No economy will grow. The Chinese, at the peak of their growth, were investing up to 40%, if not 50% of GDP in their economy. Compare us to that, and yet we say we want growth. We want more money to be spent on A and B and C, and at the same time, we have money being stolen as well. But what we're experiencing in South Africa, I really like to meet the people who say that stealing is not happening in this country. apart from one or two TV stations and so on, you know. So, what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, and the many comrades that are here as well, that what we're seeing in South Africa is also part of a global picture. It's part of a global picture where there is a growing divide between political, business, and other elites on the one hand, and citizens on the other hand. And that divide is reflected in the growing inequality both in the developed world and in the developing world as well. And as a result, there's a huge critique developing, which I'm sure we can discuss later, on what kind of globalization has been favorable for development and what kind of globalization has been unfavorable for development. But we're also learning about a new concept, I'm sure some of you are better equipped with it than I am, called deviant globalization. And that is how, for example, the rapid flow of money with the press of a button and highly energized technology, which facilitates financial flows from one part of the world to another, is also facilitating at an equally fast speed money laundering as well. And so many of the accusations arising from the so-called Gupta leaks and so on is in fact an accusation around racketeering and money laundering, which are serious offenses, both in terms of our law, but international law as well. So, all of this phenomena and many more are in fact, as part of the global narrative, also being masked by a new level of authoritarianism that is creeping through different parts of the world. And you can see it in parts of, to an instance in Turkey. There's the developments in Poland around the judiciary. Some would say elements of it are creeping into the US politics as well. And what goes with this authoritarianism is, let's call it a bit of ingenuity. And of course, you pay Bell Pottinger for some of that as well. And that ingenuity results in fancy narratives that attempt to mask the real activity going on, which is extraction from the state for the benefit of a few. Now, how does state capture happen? They're going to probably describe it better than I will. But there's today, as a result of studying what has happened between about 2012 and now, there's a picture that can be drawn about a systematic approach in relation to the question of state capture and the extraction, or put in simple terms, stealing of state resources. And that involves usually, firstly, ensuring that, for example, in state-owned entities, which has become very evident now, you change the board and put in the right people, change the chief executive, put in the right person, change this, the financial officer, and you saw them on TV the other day trying to justify the results of Eskom, for example, which has been a major source of benefit for the extractors and capturers in our society. And then if there are good people in the system, what you then do is cook up some charge or the other, either take them through the justice mill or some other mill, and eventually settle with them and say, leave the enterprise, go and do something else. And so starts the process of firstly inquiring what are the next big tenders that are going to appear on the table, so to speak. And so procurement becomes an important area, as the study has actually found. And in other instances, you take an asset and you reduce its value. And the accusation is actually made in relation to what has become known as the optimum deal, where as a result of the collaboration of a government department, a government minister possibly, and a state-owned enterprise, the value of a mine drops. It's now cheap enough for somebody else to actually buy. But as we heard the other day, it's not just cheap enough to buy. You actually have a state-owned entity through its chief financial officer, in this case, Mr. Singh, actually offering a guarantee to those who would want to borrow money in order to buy the mine. Now, can you imagine that right before us, or under our noses, so to speak, you have a person who's holding a very senior position in a state-owned enterprise actually saying, no, yes, I did give the guarantee. Of course, they didn't use it, But who's asking you whether they used it? Who gave you permission to give the guarantee? That's the question that you have to answer. And there's a coy smile that accompanies this answer to the question from the press as well. And it's quite remarkable how people who have been collaborating or allegedly collaborating, in case there's some legal action, let me say allegedly as well, smiling when they give these answers, instead of having a worried look that they're being accused of passing on billions of rands of benefit from the state to a select few in this particular instance. Of course, you then tackle SOEs, you try and buy over people from the public service or compromise them in some way. As I say, you shake down certain assets in the state. And if you watch the saga around the Ministry of Mineral Resources, the threat by Mr. Zwane that he's going to freeze the issuing of licenses, the manner in which mining productivity has been impacted in recent times as well, and of course the frequent trips that have been recorded to Dubai in particular. Dubai must be a really nice place in 40 degrees temperature. And then of course the ultimate prize was why actually, if you like, just extract from the periphery. Let's go to the heart. Let's go to the heart of government finances. And the heart of government finances is capturing the fiscus. And so we now have allegations in that regard as well. So it's not good enough to actually begin to tackle the treasury, try to malign the South African Reserve Bank so you can destabilize our economy even more, tackle the Financial Intelligence Center so that the transactions that are being recorded, which might appear to be suspicious, which might have to be reported to enforcement agencies, are no longer done in the way they should be done. But importantly, try to dismantle the Central Procurement Office that was set up after many years of hard work in order to get savings in government, and there's billions of rands of savings as a result of so-called transversal contracts. So let me give you one example. Just by having a transversal contract, in other words, by buying antiretroviral drugs centrally, in the first year we saved somewhere between 2 to 3 billion rands. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we must have saved a hell of a lot more money as a result of those endeavors. No, but shut the place down because it gets in the way of actually dismantling or understanding the nature of the transactions that are going on. I've spoken about the locomotives already, but better still, make sure that the criminal justice system doesn't chase the actual rogue. So in the case of my colleague, Mr. Jonas, the problem was that he reported that there was a bribe, not the fact that somebody offered a bribe. Can you imagine? That's the state that we are in South Africa, that those who go around bribing people, according to his experience, can live scot-free without any intervention from the enforcement agencies, but others can actually carry on and be interfered with by these agencies as well. The last 3 points. Firstly, radical economic transformation. There's absolutely no doubt that South Africa's economy has not been transformed. There's absolutely no doubt that South Africa's economy needs to be restructured, both in an ownership sense, but also in the sense that it must be made more dynamic, more diverse, more competitive, and world-class so that it can serve its citizens in a much better way. Now the question is, the way in which the radical economic transformation slogan is used, is that used purposively in order to begin a process, if you like, as part of the second phase of the transition, as we in the ANC describe it, to place our economy on a different kind of footing, higher levels of growth, higher levels of investment, more jobs being created, more money in the fiscus, a higher capability to service all South Africans and their needs? Or is the slogan being used to actually mask stealing from the state? That's the critical question that we face. And so we must be careful about slogans, because slogans don't bring about the changes that Tata Madiba is talking about in the quotation I gave you. What brings about change is hard work. Changing doesn't just happen because we mouth a particular slogan. Change happens because we understand the systems that need to be changed. We understand and have a vision of the kind of economy that we want in the future, an economy that will make all of us a lot more prosperous, where poverty is eliminated, where inequality is minimized as much as possible, but all South Africans, of course, have a much better standard of living. But it must also be an economy which is benefiting the masses in South Africa, not a small clique. And that's the distinction that we need to draw. Are the masses benefiting, or is a small clique benefiting? And are some of the slogans that are derived from Bell Pottinger in London or elsewhere for our benefit as citizens and for South Africa? Are there Bell Pottinger supporters here? Eh? Are there Bell Pottinger supporters here? Well, then the rest of you must actually judge them. It's not for me to say anything. You see? If you think after all these efforts at sabotaging the kind of non-racialism that we're trying to build, by foreign people coming here and actually getting paid to destroy our nation. Can you believe that? We actually pay from the fiscus indirectly in order for them to actually mess us around in this country. So, we want radical economic transformation that will restructure the economy, that will diversify the economy, create confidence in our economy, create jobs for the young people, increase the revenue, and make sure, above all, that the poor actually benefit. The second last point is, how do we challenge state capture? Firstly, we challenge state capture by exposing it and understanding it. And I want to compliment the academics in particular and other civil society organizations for the excellent work that they do. One of the questions we were asked to answer is, what is the role of intellectuals? If I may say so frankly and with apology, the role of intellectuals is not to sit down in their armchairs. The role of intellectuals is to become actively engaged in campaigns against state capture, against stealing from the state. Become activist intellectuals as we had them in the 70s and 80s, and I'm sure in years before as well. And we need to regenerate that analytical capability that will enable us to get to the heart of state capture and what is going on. Secondly, tell us a lot more about how does the system actually work. Thirdly, inform the way in which we develop our strategies to actually combat state capture. But more importantly, it's our job to expose, not only just to expose, but to inform and educate the South African public and let them know what is exactly going on and who are the beneficiaries of the state capture process. But we must also make an appeal to a certain category of South Africans. We have too many fence-sitters at the moment in all of the organizations that I've been operating in and elsewhere, waiting to see which way are things going to actually fall. And the appeal I want to make is that now is the time to make a decision about where you stand. That we must not allow the fact that we have a little tender from the state or a little business going on the side, or because we think we're going to get more businesses or business opportunities from the state, we keep quiet. If we keep quiet, we are going to slump into a 10-year disaster. It's going to take us 5 to 10 years to recover from the disaster that we're actually heading towards. And so it's very important that as South Africans, we not only become better informed, but become actively involved in resisting state capture because of a simple reason. This South Africa is our country. Nobody must be allowed to steal it from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pravin, Gordhan, for your provoking insights, and I think for telling us exactly what we need to hear. The need for human dignity, the need to get back to our principles and values that ushered in this democracy, not to sell our sovereignty to anyone. We should be protecting the public purse, not be stealing from it. The impact that this has on our young people, on everybody in this country, and the need to get back to political morality. You provided us with ways in which the state capture is unfolding in our society, but also then ending with the need for us to be activist intellectuals in activist universities. Mcebisi, Jonas?
can I salute the leadership of the university, management, students, and lecturers. Can I also salute all of those who thought it important to come to this very important occasion. I'll try as much to be brief, because I am assuming that there will be a lot of engagement around these things. Can I start off by making a point that probably Comrade PJ was trying to make boldly, that South Africa is facing its defining moment, both politically and economically. And I think sometimes most of the debates that are going on about what needs to happen and what we confronted tend to miss the urgency of acting against and some of the problems we're confronting as a country. At an economic level, this is, if I'm sure the economics in the room will tell you, this is the 5th year South Africa is experiencing weak growth. And in fact, we've gone even down the tube. We are now in recession. And that's real. That's a real challenge that we have to deal with. Equally, we have to confront a reality that we are increasingly, globally as a country, becoming the capital of corruption and state capture, if we do not realize. And that's what Comrade PJ was talking about. In fact, to understand these facts, we probably need to realize that if you take our SOCs, because it would seem that our logic for radical economic transformation, or many people's logic of radical economic transformation, tend to focus on SOCs. And precisely because of that, the research that was done by a few academics recently also demonstrate that that actually becomes a smoke screen for corruption and state capture. In fact, most of our state-owned enterprises are centers for money racketeering, if nothing else. So if you're thinking about that as a problem, I just wanted to make a point again then. Eskom, if you take Eskom, annually it spends 45 billion on coal contracts. 45 billion on coal contracts for its 13 coal-fired power stations. And if you take Transnet, and these are the centers of this thing that we call state capture, would spend 300 billion improving its aging rail infrastructure between now and probably 2019. And those are the sums that we're talking about. These are not just small numbers that we're talking about. It's a real challenge that we have to deal with. And we also have to think about it in another way, that what we lose through state capture and corruption is what is forfeited by education, health, and all the other developmental objectives that we have as a country. So state capture, irrespective of where we stand politically, and there is, I think, because of the nature of our transition and democracy, which is a party democracy, many people tend to want to make their political parties statues. Political parties need to be dynamic and understand the challenge that we're facing. And there was a time when we espoused democratic centralism at some point. The reality is democratic centralism in a captured organization implies that you actually sell the economy, you sell the country, you undermine the sovereignty of the country, you undermine the institutions that are key for driving development in our country. So we've got to be careful again about, we've got to be careful though about treating our organizations as statues. Our organizations must be dynamic. Another element, of course, of this challenge that we're facing is the reality that we've got to bring back the people to the center of the transformation project. We must bring back this ideal of the people as the centerpiece of the transformation project. The second point I wanted to make is that because of the difficulties that I've just outlined, and probably PJ has outlined quite effectively, we are seeing the rise of short-termism and populism. And it's on the rise. It's on the rise. And in part, this populism is driven by the reality that those who lead us in political organizations across political spectrum realize that the masses are not blind to inequality, to poverty. The masses are not blind to corruption and state capture. And populism in that context becomes the cover for most political leaders that we have. So there are two kinds, and I'll probably PG is making the point. You're seeing two kinds of manners of doing politics in our country. On the one part is what is probably under challenge. The way of doing politics that emphasizes the importance of the Constitution, that emphasizes the importance of rules, that emphasizes the importance of the legal frameworks that we've developed as the basis for doing some of the things that we are doing. But we have a growing new way of doing politics in this country, which is based on profound mistrust of the formal rules of the game, whether of the Constitution or of government. These politics tend to claim to be speaking on behalf of ordinary people. There is no doubt that it has produced major institutional instability. And again, there is a connection between the creation of the institutional instability that we have and the deepening of state capture and corruption. So this kind of politics where constitution suddenly is seen to be a threat to transformation as opposed to a framework and a vehicle for transformation, it has actually been a very powerful tool used to undermine progressively institutions. Now there's literature across the board. Many researchers will tell you about the importance of institutions. The more sustainable a country's institutions are, the more entrenched countries' institutions are, the greater are the chances for any economy to grow and deal with the fundamental problem it faces. So you have three elements of politics that are generated by this second feature of politics. The first, as I'm saying, it comes at the expense of the Constitution and South Africa's democratic order. You have cases after cases we can cite, we can give you some of those cases where the court will rule, this is the way this must be done, and some government departments will proceed and do the opposite, and continue to do the opposite even when the court says, no, it's not like that. It also serves, these politics also serve, as I was trying to indicate, to fundamentally weaken state institutions. You cannot have state capture if state institutions are strong. So the first thing that you have to do to achieve this notion of state capture is to ensure that you weaken state institutions. And that's probably the second element of this. The last element is it produces highly racialized politics without substance. There is inequality in this country, and I'll come to that point anyway. But that's the nature of the political context within which we are dealing with this thing. I have argued in a number of times, and I'll continue to argue, that the 1994 consensus has become unviable and will unravel if it is not combined with a new economic consensus. And I would argue, and I'll continue to argue, that as a country we do require a new economic consensus. Of course, we have to concede there are very important aspects of the 1994 consensus, especially, of course, the welfare spending component, which has brought significant social returns in reducing extreme poverty, the robust system of accountability, and the democratic institutions that were achieved to provide critical checks and balances to those entrusted with control of state and administration. Of course, all of that is under threat as we speak because of all the factors that PG has just said. But we must also accept another reality, because I think there's a need for a more sober debate about what are the problems that we're confronting. The other reality that we must accept is that South Africa remains locked in a capital intensive and energy intensive and highly financialized historic growth path, which does a couple of things that some of them are negative. It reproduces self-serving rent-seeking by the old white foreign-owned and new black rentier classes. Is too dependent on financial inflows and commodity booms, making the economy extremely vulnerable to global shocks. Creates very little new wealth in the productive economy and excludes large number of South Africans from participating either as owners of capital or as employees in our economic system. And I'm sure most of us, I mean, I'm yet to see, and I was testing it with Lumkile now, I'm yet to see anybody disagreeing with that assertion. And that's probably a challenge that all of us must be seized with, instead of actually being hung on slogans, because slogans never really solve any problems anywhere in the world. In advancing solutions to our current predicament, we need to accept that inequality and low growth are mutually reinforcing. High inequality leads to low growth and stagnation because it reduces demand, and low growth reduces fiscal resources available for redistribution, as well as employment and wealth-creating opportunities. And these are not easy questions, and they do require us to think, not to sloganeer. However, it is also important as we do that, we deal with some of the current jargons that are being tossed around, thanks to Bell Pottinger. There is much talk currently about white monopoly capital. Now, historically, white monopoly capital played a core role in reproducing South Africa's highly unequal economy. In the mid-1980s, and in the room I can see there are a couple of 1980 lefties here. I saw Ashwin, and there are a couple of lefties of the 80s will agree. In the 1980s, some 83% of JSE shares were owned by 4 giant companies, all owned by white South Africans who controlled economic activity in mining, finance, the industrial sector, agriculture, business, and retail, etc. Of course, if you do your analysis well, you'll also realize that since then, the structure of capital has changed significantly, becoming increasingly financialized, with investment being diverted from fixed capital into high return, often speculative financial investment. Today, some of the largest segments of what used to be called white monopoly capital have globalized, with primary share listing in foreign stocks exchanges and massive interest and investment elsewhere in the world, and in many cases far surpassing their interest in South Africa. The same liberalized capital controls that allowed our large conglomerates to export capital and list abroad means that private capital in our economy is now significantly foreign-owned. Just under 40% of JSE capitalization and 50% of JSE top 40 is foreign-owned. Top 40 companies are foreign-owned. Much of our government debt, approximately 40%, is also financed through foreign savings, which is why we still take our investment status and grading very importantly. And also related to that are the cost of borrowing. Because if you are reckless about the environment in the country, as many of us seem to be in the leadership, it creates an environment where you are starved of investment as an economy, and you can then come and shout about investment boycott. The reality of the matter is that confidence is central. Confidence is central to investment. Understanding these changes has enormous implications for how we engage capital in our project to restructure the economy. Much of capital we lump into the category of white monopoly capital is highly mobile, financialized, and international in orientation. Globally, this foreign-based big capital is driven by short-term shareholding maximization and ownership traded in highly liquid markets. This seriously limits our ability to draw this capital into a national development project. And given our low levels of domestic savings and current levels of government indebtedness, we must accept that disinvestment at a scale is a real threat to national sovereignty. This is, of course, not helped by current political and policy instability, which is driven by a whole range of things that I've outlined before. So reality is, I think we need, all of us, a reality check that we do need to deal with the political and policy environment in our country. If we think that we can actually generate the kind of growth that we require to ensure that we achieve some of the objectives that we set for ourselves. We must also avoid reducing transformation to black rent-seeking, replacing white rent-seeking. Economic transformation is not simply about increasing black ownership of large JSE-listed corporations to the corresponding reduction of South African white and foreign ownership. That's not necessarily transformation. Even if this could be accomplished without disruptions such as capital flight, it will not reduce inequality, which is a fundamental problem that we have. In fact, it could possibly increase inequality. Instead, I would argue that a fundamental restructuring of the economy is required, in which rent-seeking is increasingly replaced by the development of new productive capabilities, in which the previously dispossessed have correspondingly high share on mass scale. This includes taking into account the real factors that excludes the poor and previously dispossessed from accumulating wealth and overcoming asset poverty, such as access to capital, productive assets, including land, skills, markets, and in a context of the fourth industrial revolution, technology. In essence, we need to shift government's policy from focus on redistributing just only existing assets and doing that as an end in itself, to linking redistribution to production outcomes in order to have sustained economic impact. This becomes the core business of a developmental state if we talk about a developmental state as opposed to a captured state. We must also leverage the role of what I'll call state capital in the South African context. The state currently owns and controls approximately 30% of the economy in highly strategic sectors, including state banking, information, technology, energy, transport, aerospace, and weapons industry, and communication. And of course, all of these currently are under threat because of corruption and state capture. In addition, the state owns approximately 25% of land and has an array of regulatory and administrative apparatuses to influence the behavior of capital. Hard questions must be asked about whether we are deriving optimal growth and inequality reduction outcomes from this state capital. Now, I know that sometimes our argument gravitates towards promotion of what many people will call state capitalism. The reality of the matter is, in instances where state capitalism has been successful, there are fundamental conditionalities for it to be successful. And one of them relates to the fact that you must have zero tolerance to corruption. The second factor that is normally critical is that you must have meritocratic deployment in those. You don't deploy on the basis that, as we are doing, on the basis that this person will deliver X, Y, Z for me. And that's another thing. The third component is that you have to have performance focus. In other words, you must be concerned about the bottom line. It's not just and I think that's what you will get in countries like Singapore, the success of state capital in those countries. We must accept the reality that we do not have that in South Africa. Given the low levels of discipline in the state, in political organizations, in political leadership in this country, we don't have that possibility at the moment. We've got to change mindset if we are to achieve this. And we must also accept the reality that irrespective of political parties we come from, our country is in a crisis of leadership. So to deal with all of these things that I'm talking about does require leadership. It does require visionary leadership. It does require strong leadership. It doesn't require leaders who spend 80% of their time defending their problems. So what's to be done? It is evident that the coincidence of unfavorable global conditions, limitations of the 1994 consensus, I like keep on making this point about 1994 consensus in front of PG. We have this ongoing debate about this point. So I have a chance now of standing behind the pulpit and speaking alone. And the growing recognition that we are stuck in a high inequality, low growth trap implies that we need to urgently reconstruct a new consensus to transform the economy towards a more equal and more inclusive growth that we require as a country. And I've proposed that in doing that, and Comrade Pravin talks about the need for a new economic charter. And I think that will be centered around a number of obsessions that, as a country, I always make the point whenever I get the opportunity that we should have. We need a couple of obsessions, and I'm mentioning three. A national obsession with inclusive growth based on fostering new logistics, technological capabilities that will grow employment and incomes and exports. The second obsession is an obsession with constructing a state that is stronger, more capable, less corrupt, and more people-centered and developmental. And the third obsession I always make is national obsession with improving the quality of public education and training. Because I think part of what undermines everything else that we're doing are the poor education outcomes in our country. And it's something that, and if you look at the level of investment that we're making as a country in education and counterposing it with the outcomes, it is a serious problem. And in order to achieve this, we do need to build a broad alliance across society. And that's why I think it is not just imagination that many people are talking about establishing a broad front, bringing civil society, bringing different sectors of society, the labor movement and everybody else in one platform, of course including government for that matter, in one platform to begin to engage with some of the challenges that we face. I'm being told to sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mcebisi Jonas, for highlighting the state of our economy and what needs to be done, beginning by saying that we, at a defining moment in this country, both politically and economically, noting that we are increasingly becoming the capital of corruption and of state capture, and then emphasizing that we need to bring back the idea of people being at the center of our transformation project, that the current politics is one that seeks to deinstitutionalize and weaken the state, that we need a new consensus around how to build our economy, that we have a crisis of leadership. We need to be dealing with that through building a broad alliance, and that we need to go back to having a developmental state rather than a captured state. Our discussant of the two inputs for today is Mr. Mondi. You have the floor.
Good afternoon to the university management, academics, Pravin and Mr. Mcebisi, Jonas, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here as a discussant. I think it's very important for me as an academic to really highlight our interest since the state capture, as well as the future of democratic governance was highlighted by the former public protector in October 2016. That, in fact, stimulated quite a lot of interest among many of us in the academia, partly because we thought that we could play a bigger role in providing a conceptual framework to help and make sense of what was described in the report, and what we describe in our report is a sudden coup. Secondly, to collate vast amounts of data to show South Africans through our inquiry and our capability as knowledge workers that what is in the state capture can be shown empirically through the support of various players in our society, from the media that's sitting in front of me here, but also to those South Africans who work in these state institutions, who are prepared to defend the gains of 1994 and the promise of President Mandela, who fought for freedom and was prepared to lay his life for the freedom of many South Africans, and many of us here were able to stand and speak in front of you. So, as a group, our group is called State Capacity Research Group. It's composed of many compatriots, some of whom in the academia fought side by side as intellectuals in the dark days of apartheid, and were quite attracted and disappointed by the development of the country and what the state capture report of the public protector had to say. So in this work, we are very much, at the outset, PG and MJ, were very much excited by the fact that what you've articulated we are excited by the fact that you both argued strongly that there needs to be a transformation of this economy, that this economy requires that. So we like that. Secondly, also, in our report, in our collaboration with all the universities, this university, University of Stellenbosch, University of Cape Town, the University of the Witwatersrand, as well as the Power Institute, we're all able to develop this report where we're arguing that one of the interesting facts about the Zuma presidency is really the repurposing of the state for private accumulation in the form of what you call a shadow state. That is articulated in various kitchen cabinets that are contained by various players. At the center of it, as we argue in our report, is really the critical role that the current Minister of Finance played in that process. Firstly, by granting citizenship to the Gupta family, but more importantly, by ensuring that our state-owned enterprises, when he was the Minister of Public Enterprises, ensured that the boards, as well as some of the management, is changed to try and address and position that shadow state to try and take as much of the public assets that are supposed to be going to the economy to benefit the majority of South Africans in pursuit of the promise of 1994. This we show very, very strongly about how those facilitators, those men and women who were moving in places with envelopes and ensuring that they could convince those that were tendering in our procurement systems for trains at Transnet, but also in the coal tenders that my colleagues have spoken about, but also in how they tried to change the rules to suit the shadow state. What we argue very strongly is that where the state has been repurposed is really a silent coup, because clearly when the General Secretary of the ANC sees a list that says the Minister of Finance is removed because I have proof, an intelligence proof, that he is working for the other side. And therefore, here is a name for the the new Minister of Finance. When Mr. Mantashe says, we don't know where that list come from. We didn't know where the name come from. It indicates to us that really our argument around the shadow state has got some support, because we expect that somebody in the top 6 who was consulted will have defended the position of recalling our former Minister of Finance here. But also Mr. Mapaile has on record, through an affidavit, said, the evidence put across doesn't support that. So as academics, we're trying to show through those individuals and the support that state capture is not a fiction of phantom. What Amapungane have put on the table, what a number of the SOE employees have paid the price for by losing their job. It's not a story. What the Gupta leaks every day are telling us, it is not a phantom. It is real. Our country is being stolen. There is a silent coup that is taking place. So, what is to be done? Very importantly, firstly, we need to also understand how this whole process arose. I think Mr. Jonas has put across the thesis around a developmental state. It is exactly that developmental state, as well as centering our economic development on the importance and pivotal role of state-owned enterprises, as well as BEE and other formation under the name of radical economic transformation, that the repurposing and therefore the looting of our state resources was being used. So therefore, I caution Mr. Jonas that the radical economic transformation rhetoric, if there is no change, dynamic change, particularly in the leadership and in who controls the levers of power, away from the shadow state into a constitutional state, which many of us so much believe in, that radical economic transformation program, as well as the developmental state program, will be nothing but a continuation of rent seekers who will continue and strengthen the position of the state at the expense of our people who remain marginalized 23 years after our liberation. In the report, we show various institutions how this looting has taken place. I think of importance is that the recent developments show how desperate the shadow state can be in terms of the new minerals, in terms of what we call Mining Charter 3, which is the subject of a court case between business as well as the state, at the expense of the communities and the workers that are working in those mines, as we've seen in the case of Bakoni that's taking place at the moment. So what we're saying in our report is that, very importantly, there is a need for a new economic consensus. We're saying that this economic consensus critically has to ensure that it brings to the table business, labor, and civil society. And in that regard, it can never be led by the political actors, or what you argue is that the political actors that will replace Zuma in the new economic consensus must commit to realizing the vision of economic consensus within the framework of the Constitution, as well with due regard to the Public Finance Management Act, as well as ensuring that the transformation is perfectly compatible with the Constitution. So anything that's being done outside the Constitution, we argue that it's not in line with the promise of 1994 and the commitment of redress, of bringing black people in particular to the center of the economy, ensuring that those of you here have got access to the doors of learning and education without you having to go on strike because your government is being repurposed and therefore acting as a shadow state to fulfill an interest of the few, not an interest of the majority. What is clear is that state capture by shadow elites has profound implication for state institutions. It destroys public trust in the state and its organs. I'm sure a lot of you have got views about the state already and the organs, that you know what, if I need an IT, going to the Home Affairs Department, I'm gonna have to pay someone to get in front of the queue. I won't go there. Or if you're lucky enough to have access to a computer, maybe you can do it online. But how many South Africans have got computers? Secondly, it weakens key economic agencies that are tasked with delivering development outcomes. We have seen what has happened to PRASA, which is critical for many South Africans that use commuter transport to and from work. Thirdly, it erodes confidence in the economy. I think the former Minister of Finance stated very clearly that we're in a recession, unemployment is worse than ever, around 28%. Inequality we're the worst unequal middle income country, and poverty continues in this country. So when there is no trust in public institutions, there is very little goodwill to express solidarity through tax. Large companies are predisposed to sit on cash, as we have seen with many of them over 600 billion rand in cash, rather than investing it towards productive use. Criminality proliferates, exploiting weaknesses in intelligence and crime enforcement authorities. We know ours already have been captured. The fact that we have continuous leaks in the Gupta leaks, and not even one has been questioned, reinforces the point that there is a lot of weaknesses around our prosecution capability. The majority of South Africans will bear the brunt of these corrosive developments. Worryingly, large-scale corruption enables much wider corruption. Under such condition, it is impossible to achieve transformation objectives that could improve the livelihoods of the majority of South Africans. Therefore, for us as South Africans, as academics ourselves, we can only make a contribution towards the inquiry. We can make a contribution to a debate. But what is very important for all of you here is to understand that there's been a silent coup. Our state has been repurposed for private accumulation. As Mandela said, it's all in our hands. Therefore, if you want a democratic, constitutional, redistributive, caring state, it is our own hands. And you have to raise your hands, and hopefully some of you who are howling here, you will make that noise to a number of parliamentarians that on the 8th, they do the right thing.
Thank you to our discussant. I see we're using initials here. Should I say thank you to LM? Speaking to the findings of the report, he was one of the authors of that report on how the state has been captured, the repurposing of the state, the silent coup, as you mentioned, how we can subvert concepts, very well-intentioned concepts, for narrow political interests. I'm going to open up for discussion now. We're going to take 2 rounds of questions. You will see there are 2 standing mics there. If you can line up behind those mics. All those who have a question to ask, we will take 6 questions in the first round. Please come to the mic if you have a question. Recall, we are asking for questions and short comments, not long speeches, and not more than 1 question too. Shall we start on this side? Malusi? Shh. Silence, please. Silence, please. Thank you. This side.
Thank you to former Minister and Deputy Minister and Prof. Mendu. My question is very simple. You, in your allusion to inclusive growth, oh, by the way, my name is Tulevan Mtlana from ASRI. In your allusion to inclusive growth, I just want to hear your sentiments of an establishment of a state-owned bank and whether it would be beneficial for the poor in ensuring financial inclusion or whether that is just another way of looting the resources.
Thank you. This side.
Good day. My name is Simeon Manamela. I'm a postgrad here. My question will go to Mr. Mondi. Last few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to attend the event at Beth, which was about a courageous event where one, sorry? Is it audible? Yeah. one of the political economists, Mr. Mcebisi, reiterated about the friction between the political elites and the business elites. So my question is, how do we address transform economy? I mean, how do we transform the economy? Transform the economy radically while there's a friction between the political elites and the business elites? I thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lorato Mashanuke. I'm from the AO Socioeconomic Research Institute. So my question is to Mr. Jonas. You spoke about how many South Africans are viewed from public participation. Well, according to my knowledge, public participation is seen as one of the most important ways in which we can hold our government accountable. From a citizen's perspective, I would like to know, considering that there isn't a lot that we can do to hold public servants accountable, do you think new avenues or mechanisms need to be developed for citizens to be able to hold public servants accountable? Because I believe that South Africa is one of the most unaccountable governments ever. And if we solve that problem, we wouldn't have issues like the state capture. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Look, good day. My name is Mcebisi. I'm a third-year student at this university and also a student activist. First, let me acknowledge the speakers in front. You know, it's very interesting that such engagements are not only held in memorial services, but they are also extended to institutions of higher learning, spaces where thought should thrive, and that answers to complex problems are not only answered through using basic common sense arguments. For example, the question of the invitation speaks to state capture, white monopoly, capital, but as the narrative has been unfolding here, there's only been one side of the narrative that has been advanced. And I want to question that if, as students of learning, we agreed that the state is an organ of irreconcilable class antagonisms, and we then further claim that the state has been captured, whereas we know that the term of white monopoly capital, maybe if there were still radical youth inside the ANC, they will tell you that in 1969 in Morogoro, the NDR clearly and explicitly stated who's the enemy of a South African struggle. Post everything else, we have a former finance minister which sat on top of all transactions in the South African governance, which even failed to allocate proper funding to these very same students who are still owing fees to state.
Thank you. A question, right?
Yes, but don't police engagement. This is a problem in South Africa. This is an institution of higher learning, and you must stop this thing of saying students at UJ are not smart enough and only throttling people of vets here. We're going to have an engagement. Don't rush us. Number one, white monopoly capital. We know we never went to exile. We never formed the armed struggle. As in much, we can't come to South Africans today and tell them that their enemy is colorless. Monopoly capital. Who has our things? Mr. Pravin, you know, you sit on these boards of these global multinational companies there. Who has the land today? Who controls the JSE today? Who is in charge of large asset management firms today? Who is in charge of all measures of principal capital assets?
We've got the point. Thank you.
I am very interested in knowing in which faction in the ANC elected conference you are in, because you are not telling these students here the truth. You are giving one side of the story. Who has the land today?
Thank you. We've got the... Thank you. Okay, we've heard you. This is... Can we settle down? All right? This is not the only engagement. We are going to have multiple engagements and hear multiple voices. Yeah, we have only got 2 hours here. We cannot do everything in 2 hours. Last question, this side.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Palisa Tsubi, political sciences student here at the University of Johannesburg. In addition to what Comrade Goa has said, the call for radical economic transformation has grown louder following President Jacob Zuma's 2017 State of the National Address. Accompanying those calls in line of argument that says white monopoly capital is to blame for the fact that majority of black South Africans remain marginalized from the mainstream economy 22 years into democracy. The term white monopoly capital is the now, but increasingly it is used to deflect attention away from the real issue. Those include government incompetencies, corruption, poor infrastructure, and lack of skills and bad policies. I say my solution is to solve the current situation of a number of measures need to be taken that stimulate economical growth. First, the government needs to go back to basics. My question now is, Minister Pravin Gordhan, why now? Why now are you coming up and paying up? Why weren't you coming out from the first, when it first happened? Why coming out now? Is it because you were sick? We want to know the truth. Let's discuss, let's know the truth.
Okay, thank you. 6. Sorry. We'll take the first 6 questions and get a response. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I think the question, Malus's point, you're right. I probably, if you go back and read the research by the academics on state capture, it traces it back, I think. It has a long section that traces the history of where we are and some of the problems and challenges we have. So you are right. I think, in a sense, there is a need to have a backward look, to look at what happened before and some of the policy decisions and non-implementation of policy and the weaknesses in the state. And one of the things that come out very glaringly in the analysis increasingly is that if you think about it, the period of growth is the 2001, am I right? 2001 to about 2008, 09. That was on the back of commodity boom. The demand and prices of commodities were very high. Now, that's the problem with countries like ourselves, where you have over-dependence on commodities. So it does point to a weakness that I think in that period, perhaps we could have done more to direct resources towards growing the productive sector of the economy. So indeed, many of the things you're raising are acknowledged. But that cannot be a justification for accepting state capture and corruption. It is a real problem. And if you think it is not a problem, you must think very hard and very fast. Because the reality of the matter is that state capacity is being eroded. The reality of the matter is that fiscus is getting weaker because revenue is declining, the economy is not growing. Very soon, most of the stuff that we're talking about that we need to do will just be a pipe dream. We've got examples of countries that went that path. Thule, I hope I'm right with the name, Thule, on inclusive growth and state-owned bank. Look, I mean, I always make the point that there's nothing probably fundamentally wrong with a state owning a bank or not owning a bank. There's nothing wrong really with that. But let's face it, in a context where you are unable to manage your SOCs now, you want to create a bank. How on earth are you going to manage the bank? So for me, it's probably not even about an ideological or political discussion. The reality of the matter is that there is high dysfunctionality in our state-owned enterprises. The reality, we can't even manage our SAA, SOCs, all of them, and yet you want to add on them even the most sensitive institution that can be created, and therefore damage your financial system as a country. So all I'm saying, Tula, is that maybe if you have dealt with some of the weaknesses in the state-owned enterprises, maybe when you have transformed them and refocused them, and you are capable of managing them, and you put right leadership in them, you probably might have a different outcome. In the current context, I think to call for a state bank is actually another guise to achieve another objective other than development. There's a whole lot of ideological questions raised. I didn't hear your name, by the way, comrade. But Goba. There are a whole range of ideological questions that you raise, Comrade Goba, and I would probably suggest that maybe we should engage with that, because I think around and I know that the historic view of the left, and it continues to be around the state, is probably a view that sees it as an instrument of class rule, essentially. That's what it is. But the truth of the matter is that we actually set ourselves a project to transform the state. And probably the argument that we're making is that we have failed in that project. And that's probably the message that we're saying. And we can have a conceptual debate about, in the current context, what constitutes the state in South Africa, what constitutes a developmental state, and what should be the elements of a developmental state. And I would argue that we should strive for more a pragmatic solution rather than an ideological solution. Because most of the arguments you have raised are probably very tired and very old. Thanks.
Comrade Malusi, my colleague has addressed your question, but I think you're right on the one issue. Leaders generally, if not all of us, must have the humility to say, as you point out, that from time to time we are going to make mistakes and we must own up to it. So, for example, we opened up parts of our economy, the leather industry, textile industry, clothing industry, after the GATT agreement was signed and implemented after 1994, too soon, without ensuring that we restructure those parts of the economy so that they can survive the kind of open competition that the lowering of tariff barriers will actually result in. We closed nursing colleges and teacher training colleges and made mistakes in that regard as well. So for that generation that made those mistakes, I apologize. They must come and apologize for themselves as well. But mistakes do happen. We are human, you see. So when we were your age and students as well, we also had the vibrancy, in fact, far greater vibrancy than you show. Yeah. We walked the streets, we marched the marches, we took on the apartheid regime, not imaginary ones, real ones, you see. And we worked in the underground of the ANC with real challenges. We're not talking about others who went and did armed struggle and all that. He was in exile for many years. I was in the underground for many years. So we'll talk about our credentials at some point in time. On the question of the state-owned bank, we have several. We have the Post Bank, which is going to get a license to become a retail bank if all things are met by the end of the year, I believe. We have the Development Bank of Southern Africa. We have the IDC, which is a bank. We have other entities, regional banks as well. Some of them are well run. Some of them have been sources of looting as well. So the state banks are there. The question that I think you're really concerned about is how do we get finance at less than a market rate for those who need cheap finance in order to get their businesses going. That's the big challenge we have in South Africa. And what that means is that ultimately, we have the land bank as well. Ultimately, government has to have resources in order to provide subsidies to those institutions so that those institutions can provide cheaper loans, cheaper than what the commercial banks will be offering. There's no free money. Most of these institutions go to the market and borrow money, and they borrow at market rates. They have to make a small margin, meaning a small profit, on what they borrow in order to pay for their administrative expenses. So there are certain subsidies that we've built in for some of these institutions, but one of the things we need to do, again, we come back to the question of growing the economy, getting more revenue into the fiscus, so that we can pay for the additional demands and needs that our people actually have. Without that, there's no money available to do the kinds of things we're talking about. And as you correctly point out, in some instances, banks have provided loans, and there are one or two names in the public domain at the moment, 50 million rand loan given to somebody, not quite repaid, and so on and so on. And you can see I'm being very careful. I'm not mentioning names at the moment. But you can do, since you are students, you can do the research and find out who is actually mentioned in the political domain. The friction between different elites and the question of the state. The state, to one extent, is not an organ of irreconcilable differences. The state often reconciles differences because there are vested interests of all sorts, some loud, some not so loud, some vocal and with influence and leverage, others without leverage, and that's largely the poor. And the state has to ensure what its mission is. And the developmental state's mission is very clear. Help the poor, grow the economy, ensure that we have a progressive tax system, ensure that the distribution of the tax system benefits the majority of citizens and not a small group of people. So I think it's in that kind of context that the question of political and business elites needs to be brought to the fore, and in particular in relation to the state. But, in the last year, 2016, when faced with a crisis around downgrading our economy to junk status, which is halfway there, we were able to get business, labor, and government to collaborate. We were able to get ourselves to work together in the national interest, not in the sectoral interest. We were able to avoid the downgrades for our economy, and we had a partnership going, one of which, for example, will be rounded up soon in terms of the discussions, to give 1 million young people work opportunities or work exposure over a 3-year period as a result of working both with the unions and the business on the one hand and government on the other hand. What we require is more initiatives of that sort in order to give practical meaning to the things that we are talking about rather than just the kind of slogans at the end of the day. Lerato, your point about public servants and so on being accountable is a valuable point. And the question we need to ask is what other systems of accountability can we develop? And ultimately, the accountability comes about when citizens are aware of what is going on, when citizens are active about what they have displeasures about, where citizens can actually call political parties and political leaders to account and not just believe in narratives of all sorts, which are intended, as all three of us have pointed out, to actually mask the real issues. So I just happened to look at News 24, and there's an exclusive headline: Indian IT guru linked to fake WMC sites. Several disinformation websites registered this year to promote the white monopoly capital narrative have been traced to a web design and online reputation management company in India. It happens to be in the province of Uttar Pradesh, where the Guptas actually come from, according to this article. And they have, for the record, denied any links. I'm not saying it, I'm reading. I'm reading. No point in making eye. Okay? And there's, you can read it for yourself. You can read it for yourself. But the key issue is, if you just remove the slogan for a minute, we all agree that the South African economy is a highly concentrated economy. We all agree that the key parts of the economy, whether it's land, whether it's big companies or medium-sized companies, or it's certain types of economic resources, apart from those that the state holds at this point in time, is historically and currently controlled by the white part of our population. We all agree that in restructuring this economy, we need to have the demographics of this country represented in the ownership and management of this economy. The question is not about either our critique or our intent. The question is, how do you get there in a way in which we do not destroy the economy in the process of getting there? And what we want is new ideas. The former Deputy Minister talked about some of them, critique of the capital intensivity, some reliance on the mining sector in terms of exports currently, the lack of diversity, the lack of innovation, the lack of enterprise, the lack of entrepreneurship, the small size of the small business sector, little attention being given to support for the informal business sector in South Africa. These are the practical areas of involvement and engagement where we've got to come up with solutions, not slogans, and solutions which actually give our own people new opportunities without becoming racist in the process. That's the issue, right? So all we want from audiences and engagements like this is not lack of engagement, but lack of, rather more competition around ideas, but also, as many economists will tell you, ideas are one thing. The practice of ideas, the implementation of ideas, building a developmental state, there's lots of articles and books written about that now. The question is, how do you create a developmental state that will actually practice development? And one of the biggest weaknesses we have in South Africa is the lack of skills in the state, right? And that's what makes us less of a developmental state. The other critique of ourselves is that we're good on policies, including my own organization, but we're weak on implementation. And if you can't implement the policies that you come up with, they're not worth the paper that they're actually written on at the end of the day. So my one appeal to all of you is not questions like who controls, we all know who controls the land and JSE, Mr. Goba. That's beyond question. The real question is, apart from populist mobilization, where's the solution? And having slogans around that doesn't really help us. Like I told you, we've been in your place before. Yeah, at a time when it was far more difficult to... No. Don't cast aspersions. Both you and Palesa. You see, don't cast aspersions on people. Debate ideas. Give us alternatives. Show us what you've done in practice. That's the real issue. So if you want to test credentials, come and talk to us about how we changed the South African Revenue Service. Hold on. You had your turn. Democracy also means hear the other side. I heard you. I didn't interrupt you when you had to speak. Hear me now. If you want to know about actually doing concrete things, each of us can talk about that. So I worked 10 years in the South African Revenue Service. We completely transformed that agency so that, in fact, from a couple of 100 million rands that was going into student subsidies, 9 billion rands went into student subsidies. And more needs to go there, I agree. So imagine if all of the money that we are, and the reports are showing, is being stolen from the fiscus, was actually committed to student fees, how different your life would have been. Eh? That's the issue. Now the question and the challenge for you is whether you have the will and you have the creativity and you have the commitment to making sure that you join us in ending corruption in South Africa. That's the real issue you have to confront. To Palesa, I see you were reading your question from your phone, so I won't ask you who sent you the question. But if you want to know what each of us have said, go and read each of the budget speeches and the speeches that we've made in Parliament. People like myself, and there are many others, who've been very clear about our stand on the issue of corruption. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
Thank you very much. We started off here by saying that we were going to have a respectful engagement. We're going to ask questions, we're going to hear ideas, we are not going to shout each other down. Okay? We want to have many more of these kinds of engagements. We have to respect people's time as well. At the moment, we are running over time by about 25 minutes. What I'm going to do is simply take one question each from the side and have Mr. Mondi respond to that question, and then we will have the closing. All right? One question each from each side, and the time is up. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sanlam Auditorium. I'm a resident at Joburg Park. Points that are pointed out here are important. In such a sense that in a time that we are now, it's a matter of whether or not we want change. And if we want to take change, how are we going to do that? There's no use fighting each other. As much as we all have differences, there's no use saying you are wrong, I am right. Please, sorry, please guys, can you just give me time? I will talk. You were given time to talk. Okay, sorry. I'm saying here, as much as we are here discussing these ideas that we need change.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we've got the point. 1 second, one question. Thank you. 1 second, one question.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know, I find it quite funny that Pravin and Mcebisi still refer to each other as minister and deputy minister. It's quite funny. And just from the start, my name is Pusho Sol. I'm a student here in the University of Johannesburg, and I'm a member in good standing of the Economic Freedom Fighters and its student command. First and foremost, I would like to wish happy birthday, 4th anniversary to the EFF, the People's Movement. Since this engagement started, because it masquerades as an engagement, but it's a clear Save South Africa anti-Zuma campaign. Since it started, it made me realize one thing, and that is the crisis in South African politics today is the lack of ideology. And Pravin and Mcebisi, Jonas, they do not have ideology. They are empty. And then they stand there and they're like, ideas are archaic or what, and their capitalism is more than 500 years old. The ideas that they're using here about efficiency, about what, they're more than 500 years old. So
okay, thank you. No,
that is
not a question.
Wait, I'm still speaking.
Thank you. We said one question. We are really running out of time. We need a summing up. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my job is to say a vote of thanks. And so we have to thank the people who put this together, and the people who did the video, the people who did the hall, the people who did all this stuff here. But most importantly, to thank our speakers. It's not easy to go against people you fought with, you shared trenches with, you have guns with. And I think our speakers are doing that in South Africa. And for that, we owe them an incredible amount. And I think for those of us here, we should give them a round of applause. And I'm sure our speakers are unfazed, but we thank them generously. Thank you.